favorite one was from somebody in Germany that said, "Thank God there's a voice of reason coming out of America." And I said, "Holy crap, if I'm it, we're all in trouble." I recently got a note from a captain in Afghanistan who saw my interview with Jesse Ventura on Google and thanked me for it. So when he gets home, let's hope he gets home, he'll be turning on to the show. There's a lot of people that want to know what we know. The time to be embarrassed to talk to your friends, your neighbors, or anyone that will listen is long past. You've got to look for a segue and you've got to use it. You know, I've changed the lives of everyone from the person that packs my grocery bags, to my hairdresser, to my masseuse, to anybody on the street. If I have a chance to talk to people, I'm there. I even talk in my sleep. I'm doing interviews with invisible people. As you know, Danny Schechter is going to be giving the keynote, and while he's out somewhere, I wanted to introduce the panel. First of all, we have Dr. Steve Alden. You might have seen him last night. Steve is a New York Times bestseller. He's this good-looking lad here on the right. Am I right? Well, you're right, maybe. His book, The Shell Game, which I just noticed is outside on a table for sale. Do not leave without one. And I'm not getting a cut of that. He can attest. I read that book in 2 days. Holy crap, that book will keep your attention throughout the whole book. It's a wild ride. It's a mixture of facts on 9/11 and what could be the next false flag attack on the United States if we don't do something and quick. So I'm really happy Steve Alden is here. Actually, I'm interviewing him on my show next week, so I'm sure we'll have some fun with that. We have Danny Schechter, who everybody knows, the news dissector. Danny will be doing the keynote. We also have, I'm going to try to get them in order, but it's hard. Let's see. Just trying to take care of my own notes. Philip Rothschild, he's a poet, a lyricist, a philosopher, and a bard. And I think we need to have balance when we talk about anything, so artists have to be included in everything we do. Before the world went crazy, I actually am and was a very well-known watercolorist myself. Just seems like a million years ago. I was pre-Bush, PB. We have when life was beautiful all the time. David Rubinson is here. He's a political activist. He's co-founder of StopLostCongress.org. He's also a music and film producer. And if you saw Apocalypse Now, which I'm sure we all have, he did the music for that film. He's here. And Dr. Gary Kosiri is here. He is a poet, a teacher, a dramatist, novelist, journalist, activist. And I think I got the whole panel. Didn't leave anybody out, did I? Okay, good. All right, so then it's my pleasure now to introduce a guy. I don't want to sound like George Jessel, who needs no introduction, Danny Schechter. So, Danny, you're on.
Okay, thank you. With the TV crew from NBC, please move over. You're blocking the shot of CBS. I'm sorry, but I can't really proceed until all the networks are in a row and in line. My keynote speech will be very short. The media sucks. Thank you very much. I knew I could say something that would get agreement. In this room, you can't get agreement on air conditioning on a 97-degree day. So the idea that we can agree on something is good. And the fact that the morning panel concluded or was suggested that one of the key myths in America, the key needs of movements for change is to get on the media or do something about the media, seems to be an idea that there's pretty much universal agreement on. And that's about as far as it goes. Because while everyone agrees that our media is not serving our country, even with questions like this. Mr. Obama, do you believe that Reverend Wright loves America as much as you do? Quick, what's your response? I think we all agree that as politics struggles to go to a higher level, our media is effortlessly bringing us to a lower level. That the dumbing down process, that the framing of stories, that the merger of showbiz and newsbiz, that the self-promotion of the anchors and the networks has reached a level, a crescendo, almost unprecedented in history. Politics and political issues have been pushed onto cable stations, which, believe it or not, are not widely watched, and certainly not as widely watched as the networks still are. If you turn to a network newscast, you have to ask yourself, who's watching this newscast? And you know how you find that out? Without doing a tremendous amount of sociological and demographic research of your own, analysis and telephone calls to viewers. You look at the ads, because they've already done those market studies and research to figure out who are they targeting with their ads. And you will find that these ads are totally geared to people of my age, i.e. fossils, older people who are suffering not only with the danger, the fear of having an erection that lasts more than 4 hours, but so many other maladies and afflictions, many that you didn't hear of before, the restless hand syndrome, and many others, which suggests to you that we now know who's not watching these programs, and that is most young people in America. And what are they watching? They're watching Comedy Channel, Jon Stewart, and you say, isn't that great? Except for one thing. The Comedy Channel is there to reinforce attitudes, not really to convey information. That's why Jon Stewart frequently is bemused, if one can use that term in polite company, by the suggestion that he's really a news person. He says, I'm not. I'm a comedian. And maybe because the news today is so absurd that only comedians can do justice to it, he's become extremely popular. Next in line is YouTube, which started as one of those channels where you see somebody spraying whipped cream on themselves, in a short little clever video. A recent study just showed that most of the users of YouTube do not get news and information from that channel or that internet channel. So what we have to conclude from all of this is that despite some of the most advanced technology in the world, the ability to go live from Mount Everest, the ability to go into the depths of the oceans and project a live picture of a fish swimming around, we have less and less time devoted to investigative reporting, real journalism, analysis, interpretation, or anything that makes meaning out of facts. So we have stories on end, but we don't necessarily have people who comprehend what they're watching or realize why it's being shown to them or why it's important, with celebrity news becoming a dominant part of the news mix as never before. So if Paris, showed up at this conference, we would be in the news. But she was unfortunately called away. So as a consequence, the things that we care most deeply about, the issues and the passions that move us to act, to come to this campus and, in the southwest corner of Virginia on a Memorial Day weekend, are not the passions and the issues and the information that most Americans are exposed to. How do we know? Because they occasionally do surveys and find that only, that 69% of our high school seniors can't find Iraq on a map. A tremendous degree of media illiteracy, and illiteracy in many ways promoted by the media. When I started out at the mighty DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx as a high school newspaper, Democracy, this Republic, the media was there as a fourth estate, a group of people whose mission was, in a sense, to serve as a watchdog. Well, the watchdog has become a lapdog. And in the Gulf, in the war in Iraq, Tommy Franks, the commander supremo of the invasion, had a document in which the fourth estate had become the fourth front of the war itself. And as a consequence, the approval ratings for the war had gone from 50% of the people opposed to 70% of the people in favor because of a media campaign that was run very smartly and shrewdly by the administration and by the networks in a collusive complicity in which each side had something to benefit. High ratings for the networks meant more revenues, and of course for the administration it meant high public approval ratings. And we've gone from a situation of the war being covered extensively to the war not being covered basically at all. So it sort of disappeared from public view. And partly, this is a critique you've heard before, although most of the focus on the left is on one word: Bush, 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 bad, okay? And we march on the White House and we protest against the administration. 100,000 people go to march on the White House. No one goes to march on the Washington Post. No one goes to march on the New York Times. No one goes to march on any of the networks, but it was the network complicity that made the war possible. Without television, there would have been no war like the one we've had. The public wouldn't have been, into it. They wouldn't have been psyched up for it. And today, the same thing seems to be true with our election. Whereas the media, which was once there as a safeguard of our democracy, in many ways has become the biggest threat to our democracy. What's important, if you read polls or newspaper accounts, is whether or not the media believes this candidate is viable or not. Does so-and-so have a chance or not? And then you read these columnists who are basically assessing this and are saying that almost every major pundit has been wrong, at least 90% of the time, in their predictions and calculations about what was about to happen. Obama is going to lord it over Hillary, in Iowa and declare the election over. He didn't do it. So again and again and again, what we see is the trivialization of our politics. And we see it not simply as a mistake, but as part of a calculated effort. I was part of the startup team at CNN. I have to confess this. And I worked for 8 years at ABC News. I wrote a book about it called The More You Watch, The Less You Know, which sort of summed up my experiences there. But nevertheless, what I realized was that this is a big industry. This is a big business. This is the front, in a sense, the front door of the whole corporate system. It's the marketing arm of the corporate system. When you're reading the New York Times about what's happening in the election, you're not reading Ad Age, the publication of the advertising business, which is reporting that television networks are about to get a, quote, windfall of $3 billion for advertising in the general election. They're making money off of this. Not just a little money, a lot of money. And so they have an interest in trying to, in a sense, pump up the excitement, build a horse race, build up the personalities, tear them down, create scandals, create whatever they can to engineer more viewing by people. And in a sense, it's because cable television was built around the most successful format that actually helped define cable TV in the early days. Does anyone know what it was? Wrestling. Wrestling, where you have larger-than-life characters, and you have these scenarios, which are all scripted, by the way, which engineer excitement, and those characters are really built on a comic book view of the world. And now that comic book view of the world is driving Hollywood movies. If you look at what's in the box office, Iron Man, all of this is based on comic books, and it's all part of the, in a sense, retelling of childhood and children's stories, in a way that will, through a popular cultural form. So what we're dealing with here is a machine, a media machine. And I must say that even though most of us are upset by it, many of us don't watch it, many of us rage at it, rail at it, and all the rest of us, very few of us have made media an issue, something to work on, something to organize around. Even though it's the one experience that all Americans share, and all Americans, when asked, which is rarely, because the media doesn't really want to ask people who are going to tell them that what they're doing is wrong, when asked, viewers and consumers say they hate it, but then they watch it. Duh. Why? Because there's nothing else to watch, really, for the most part. And you can't afford to go to the movies. I mean, the popcorn costs more than what the movie tickets used to cost today. So we're facing this way in which our whole political system has become a part of the media system, with the media actually in the lead in many cases, defining the issues, framing the problems, repeating over and over again the same concerns, which usually have very little to do with most Americans, what most Americans worry about. 3 million Americans facing foreclosure. Is that a big story? No. A war spending, what is it, $3 trillion? Is that a big story? No. In other words, there's almost a direct correlation between what's important and what's not covered. So what I'm concerned about is that on the left, the problem is defined in 2 words. Bill O'Reilly. He's the problem. Isn't he horrible? And basically, and Fox News, by the way, loves that, because they love to think that they're creating agina, in the progressive world, That's what they live for, agita, whatever it is, They're, really love it. Attack me more, beat me up, because that shows me that you think I'm important enough to spend a lot of time and energy on. And if you watch, on the internet, the videos that come out, they're all about, like, when Fox attacks. But is there any analysis of what's happening on NBC or CBS or ABC? Is there any examination of growing media concentration? Is there any understanding on the part of most people about how TV formats are structured and why they do the things they do and why they're successful in many cases? Why is American Idol #1 this week, for example? Do we even pay attention to that world? Most of us would have to confess that we don't, even though that's the world that most Americans do pay attention to. So this is part of the gulf, the gap between the left, the progressive world, what it thinks is important, and the American culture, which doesn't think that's important. And as a result, we find ourselves without often a vocabulary or reference points to be able to talk, parents to their children, or the left to the system. And that's why understanding media and trying to do something about it is very important. Now, I wrote a little book. I was asked, after writing all these 9 books attacking the media, what do you really want to see? And I wrote a manifesto called The Death of the Media. And basically what I try to show is that over the years, there are a lot of people who got together and try to figure out what we would really want. What is our positive program for media change? What are we for? What kind of representation, diversity of opinion, documentary and other programming do we want to see? Few of us even think about those questions, much less express them to our local stations in any coherent way. We don't campaign on these issues. I did a film called WMD, Weapons of Mass Deception, about the role the media played in selling us the war in Iraq, okay? When I made the film, I couldn't get any channel to commit to running it. I was fortunate to get some investors to put some money in it because Michael Moore made a bundle of money, so therefore they thought they would. Most unaware that Michael Moore's film Fahrenheit 9/11 had a $62 million marketing budget. Did you know that? Okay. So it takes money to make money, and you have to be marketing and promoting. And when you have a larger-than-life personality, you can get on TV, that really helps. In my case, it was more difficult. But I did get the film seen in 40 countries. That was an achievement. I've done a book now, When News Lies, that tells the story of the film and the issues that I covered. I have a copy of it here. The next film is called, because I'm a media maker as well as a media critic, is called In Debt We Trust. And it started out because I noticed that my savings account was disappearing. Okay? And I said, gee, is this unusual? Where did it go? What's happening? And then I found out that the savings rate in America is well below zero, and that millions of people can't save anything, and that people are deeply and growing increasingly in debt. And I spotlighted something called subprime lending in 2006, and the film came out, and the film reviewer of the very hip San Francisco Chronicle said, "This is exaggerated. Doesn't this guy see that the stock market is booming? How can you predict or expect that this is going to collapse?" Duh. Well, guess what? We're now in the deepest economic crisis that we've seen in our lifetimes, and it's on the way to getting even deeper. Extremely serious. Over $8 trillion has been written down by banks. People are, struggling. The newspaper in Santa Barbara, of all places, reported that there are now 15 parking lots in Santa Barbara that open up at 11 o'clock at night so that families that are living in their cars have a safe place to stay until 6 in the morning when they have to leave. This is the quality of life for a lot of people in our country where jobs are outsourced and the rest of it. And these stories, while sometimes reported, don't make much of a dent in a public consciousness because they're really coupled with the idea which we are raising, the question we are hopefully raising, what is to be done? What can we do about these problems? How can we work together? How can we build movements for change? How can we learn from each other? How can we reach out to a broader constituency? Those are the questions the media ignores for the most part. And those are the questions that we have to raise for the most part. So I'm trying to do it with a blog on mediachannel.org, which is a network, the largest media issues network in the world. And I'm leaving here on tonight at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, and I'm flying to New York, and then I'm flying to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia because I've been invited to present to the Asia Media Forum. And I just came back from the Kazakhstan Media Forum. Media as an issue is something of global concern. People are worried about it. They're concerned about it. They think it's vital. They can't understand the gap between the media most people see in other parts of the world and the media we see in America. Anybody who comes here and looks at it is horrified. They can't believe it. And yet it goes on machine-like every day with very little intervention, very little targeting by activist groups, very little sense that this is a problem that needs to be confronted. Instead, most people on the left want to get in the media. They don't want to change the media. In other words, so-and-so, I just got interviewed on such and such a place. I had my 30 seconds of fame. And that is supposed to deal with the structural imbalance of the media system, because occasionally a progressive voice is heard on some program, usually balanced by three, non-progressive voices. Okay? So this is what passes for journalism and what passes for information. And it's something that I believe that unless we can solve this problem, unless we confront this problem, we're not going to be able to confront any other problem. I hate to say it. It's not as important maybe as people dying and et cetera and so forth. But unless people are informed about this, unless people are engaged in efforts to do something about it, nothing will get done. And that's why appeal again, once more, to people to take media seriously as an issue, to inform yourself about what the media is and what it's done. I've done a little self-dissection of my own experiences going back to high school as a journalist to try to say, what is it like working in independent media after being in the networks and working on your own. Our company, Global Vision, is now 20 years old. We've done a number of different series on human rights, on South Africa. I've done films on a wide range of issues. And we're still going. But I would say it's getting harder and harder and more difficult. Because if Move On raises $60 million for an advertising campaign, all of that money, all of it, goes right back into the mainstream media. None of it goes into independent media sector at all. So the consequence of this is we're not even, people who are sympathetic to independent media, not even funding independent media. Some people, Amy Goodman is a very good fundraiser. She's been very successful. But there are so many other projects out there that are struggling for survival. And it's harder and harder to get support for this. So in a sense, our independent media is shrinking away. The foundations that used to fund documentaries, for the most part, no longer do so. So we're again, it's becoming a sort of a commodified, marketized system of, and as a result, the kookier the film is, the wilder the characters are, the more likely you are to get money for it. The more you want to analyze something and try to do something with it, the more you have to distribute yourself. We did a film, 9/11 Press for Truth, in our company. It's about the women who lost their husbands at the World Trade Center. Clap if you will. How many people have really helped distribute it? Very few. There may be a few here. I don't want to take that away, and I encourage this. My point is not to criticize. My point is to encourage. We have to try to create and build another media, a counter media, not an alternative media just for ourselves, but a counter media that will have credibility with the American public. And in order to do that, it doesn't just mean getting on the air and rapping and ranting. It means being able to market and promote and build institutions that have some sort of staying power. It's not a race, it's a long march, it's a marathon. And it's a hard road to hoe, I have to tell you truthfully. So this challenge is a complicated one, it's an important one, and it's important that people who know so much about what happened at Building 7 on one day in September in 2001 know something about how our media system works and why that issue is not in our media system. We need to take this on as a problem and try to find ways to resolve it. One way, support independent media. Buy films, documentaries, and books by people that you care about. Share them with others. Get them into libraries. Get them onto campuses. Invite speakers to come and talk about these things in your community and on your campuses. Participate. Become the media in that respect. And on the other hand, hold the media itself accountable for what it's doing and challenge its coverage and reporting by not only writing letters to the newspaper, but calling and crusading and making a pain in the ass of yourself until somebody listens. And I'll tell you, having worked at ABC, that people do listen when they're forced to. They don't necessarily want to, but when they're confronted creatively, they will and can. And, Ms. Heller here does an excellent radio program. There's a lot of people out there doing, wonderful work. We need to find a way to cross-promote this. Instead of if you have one thing going on, suddenly you have 50 things going on. Everybody's competing for the crumbs off the table rather than figuring out ways to leverage what each other is doing and promote what each other is doing. So a lot of the problem is them. The system, it's bad. We know it's bad. We know it's really threatening our democracy. On the other hand, part of the problem is us. We haven't figured out a way to challenge it creatively, imaginatively, and persistently enough to make a difference. I hope we can. I hope we will. Thank you for having me here.
Danny Scheck there. Danny said a lot of good points. I'm sure you're all sitting there saying, what else can I do? The truth of the matter is, How much money are each of you paying for television in your house every month? Any ideas? How many of you still have television in your house? Okay, my listeners know that I will never tell them to do something I don't do. I haven't had TV in my house for 4 years, thus my brain is working. I don't pay for propaganda, lies, bullshit to come into my house, mind control, ads for this drug, that drug. As I continue to say, just say no to prescription drugs and legal drugs. They don't call it programming by accident, and that's the big problem in our country. Everybody is glued to the television. Take your children away from the monster machine. Soon TV is going to be interactive, which means they will be watching you. You know, the movie Network just came out, 25th year anniversary on DVD, and the guy had the right idea, dumping all your TVs out the window or in front of the TV stations and say, basically, take this crap and shove it.
When you see it now, it's a documentary, not a...
It is. It's become a documentary. So when people say, what can I do? That's one thing. If everybody in this country unplugged their TV, we'd have no energy crisis. Think about that. And we certainly wouldn't have a brain drain. And that's what's killing all of us as we all become little weeble couch potatoes. So think about that, because that is something you can do, and it's just pulling the plug. Take that money and support shows like mine. My show is totally listener supported because I won't sell out. I won't put corporate whores on my show, and I don't care how much money they want to pay me. I won't go to a radio station and censor myself. I just count on the grace of my listeners to keep the show going. When, years ago people used to say, I'll never pay for TV. What are you paying now? I mean, I have friends that are paying $100 a month for crap. And I'm like, $15 a month, you will be the smartest person in your neighborhood because I'm doing the homework. 12-hour days to make sure you know everything that I do and you don't have to do the work. But I need people to help me. There's a lot of people. I don't consider my work alternative media. The garbage on TV is alternative media. So it's about stepping up. And I realized I forgot to introduce one of my panel members, Dr. Robert Jensen. He's over on the end. He's a professor. He's also an author of Citizens of the Empire. He also wrote a book, The Heart of Whiteness, and I certainly would like to read both of them, Robert, so you'll have to get me some copies. And since I did say this would be an interactive session, I did the math, which is not one of my strongest fortes, but if everybody can keep it under 10 minutes, we should have at least a half hour of audience participation questions of this extremely intelligent, good-looking panel here today. And I'm going to take them in size order. No, I'm only kidding. I'm going to start with Steve Alton, the author of The Shell Game, which, and as I said before, I'm not getting a cut of it, but it's a freaking great book. And Steve, you're up first.
I hate to start out disagreeing with our leader here, but I want my TV. I got to watch the NFL on Sundays, and I watch Jon Stewart, and I need comedy in my life. I wrote the Shell Game 3 years ago. I started writing it 3 years ago, and in between chapters, I put quotes because I found so many quotes that I found that were pretty amazing and to keep things in perspective. And I just want to start out by reading one. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that a democracy always collapses over loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations has been 200 years. These nations have progressed through the following sequence: from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to apathy, from apathy to dependence, from dependence back into bondage. That sort of describes what we're going through. That was written in 1776 by Alexander Fraser Tytler, From the Decline and Fall of the Athenian Republic. The shell game is about the end of oil and the next 9/11 event. I know the next panel after this, which I'll be on, talks about 9/11 truth. I was kind of naive. I've been a mainstream author, been blessed with some luck, and my books were thrillers. I've been on the New York Times list a few times. I was on the Today Show. I was on the Fox Crier Report. I did probably 50 TV shows, hundreds of radio shows. So the reason that I wrote the shell game was to get away from some of the monster thrillers that I've written, because I was looking to take advantage of what I thought was popular in the media that would get my book more attention. So I started off and I started investigating the end of oil, which really shocked me, because without oil, the civilization not only can't function, but we can't feed ourselves. There have been studies done that without oil, of the 6.5 billion people on this planet, we can only feed about 500 million. So there's going to be a great die-off. And that shocked me. And then the more research that I did, the more I realized how 9/11 was tied to this. And 9/11 became itself a crossroads. And I was shocked by the things that I was discovering. And one of the most amazing books that I ever read was Michael C. Rupert's Crossing the Rubicon. And he's got over 1,000 references in it. And he states his case, and you cannot challenge his conclusions. And they've never been challenged. Instead, they tried to kill him. And I've met Mike after my book was written, and he read it, and he basically was reading it at night and kept emailing me and saying, "You asshole, you're keeping me up all night." And at the end of the 3 days it took him to read the book, he flew down to West Palm Beach, and we spent the next 4 days together getting to know each other. So I thought, man, this is going to be to quote George Tenet, this is going to be a slam dunk. How could I not get media coverage for this book? Jesus, I mean, this is frightening stuff. It's happening right now. I mean, everything that's in the book is happening in the media right now. There are two major issues that have been shut out of the mainstream media. One is 9/11 truth, and the other is Ron Paul. I'm not saying that I'm supporting Ron Paul, but they don't talk about Ron Paul anymore. There was one primary that he finished second, and they wouldn't say his name. They did verbal gymnastics never to say his name again. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why can't you discuss 9/11 truth? Why can't you discuss Ron Paul? Well, Ron Paul wants to end the war immediately, and that's bad for business. Because if you're GE and you own NBC and CNBC and all the other networks they own, you also are the biggest manufacturer of weapons in the world. So war is good if you're in the war business. And war is good if you're Halliburton, and war is good if you're in the oil industry, because, like Danny said, it's all about what their interests are in making money. So how do you turn this thing? You make the issues mainstream. And that's not easy to do. But if the majority of people are talking about it, and if the majority of people don't believe the lies that we've been fed about 9/11 and the things that are going on about oil, you've got to voice your opinions about it and make it mainstream. And that's a panacea. It's not an easy solution, and I don't know what the exact solution is, but forums like this are part of it. And what I try to do is slip under the radar, because I write fiction. So I figured, okay, I'm going to write a page-turning thriller that's going to keep people glued to the page, and then we get the truth in. And I have received thousands of emails, many of them from conservatives who refuse to vote Republican anymore because they read the book. So if you have friends that are like that, and we all do, get them an early Father's Day gift. I'll even sign it for you. And it's one of many things that can be done. The internet seems to be the last vestige of democracy in this country, because we are a fascist state right now. And be careful, because that's the next thing they're going to try to regulate and take away from us. And we can't let them do it. You got to speak the voices, because there are things coming down the pike that are so scary to even consider that we have to stop them now while we have an opportunity. And one of the things could be another 9/11 event that happens before the election. And why do I say that? Because these neoconservatives aren't going to go quietly into the night. And if they're willing to allow 3,000 Americans to be killed on September 11th and put our troops at risk and thousands of troops dying, and not to say anything about the innocent Iraqis who were killed, they're not going to stop and they're not going to hesitate to do it again. And what really concerns me, what really worries me is that they're already planting the seeds in the mainstream media that this is going to happen. A couple months ago, Michael Chertoff, who's the head of Homeland Security, said, "My worst nightmare is a nuclear suitcase bomb going off in a major U.S. city." Well, he might as well quoted from the book. A week later, George Bush, in defending waterboarding, said, "The next 9/11 will make the last one pale in comparison." And then Cheney just got back from his little Middle Eastern tour where he's talking about invading Iran. He's making the sales pitch again for Iran. And then the mainstream media gave that news story coverage, which wasn't really news at all, which was reading like another little war game or false flag event out in the Persian Gulf where supposedly some boats threatened speedboats from Iran. Think about what happens if another 9/11 catastrophe, and I say a nuclear suitcase bomb because logically our military is broken. Rumsfeld and Cheney broke the military. You've got kids coming back who are going on a third and fourth and fifth deployment. Suicide rate is 20% according to the USA Today among vets coming back. So the military is broken. So what's the logical step for these neocons thinking? We have to use weapons of mass destruction to bring down Iran. They're not going to use nuclear weapons, but they will use VX nerve gas because that's a chemical agent that can subdue a population. But in order to do that, you have to have an excuse that the American public and the world public is going to accept. And that means you can't just bring down 3 towers and knock off a bunch of planes. You have to go a step further. You've got to use a nuclear device because that's the next step. So how do you stop that? You beat the con by exposing it, because this is all a shell game. It's all a con. We're being conned. So you talk about it on the street, and you talk about it to your friends, and you use the internet, and you use every viable way you can to stop it before it happens by talking about it. And that's one of the reasons that I wrote the shell game. I just want to mention that I have been on some mainstream venues. I have slipped under the radar on a few. I've won ABC Philadelphia. I was on I've gotten on conservative talk shows. And it's been interesting. I was on one, and I forget the guy's name, but thank you, Jim Bohannon. I want to just tell you a little story. I went to Washington, D.C., and I'm sitting in the green room at 10 o'clock at night waiting to go on Jim Bohannon, and the guy he has on before him is this executive of Shell Oil. And I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to get killed. So Bohannon had a copy of my book, and I said, can I just borrow that? And I borrowed it during the commercial, and I just started earmarking pages. And he starts off the interview, and now my trainers, my publicists have told me, don't talk about 9/11, don't talk about 9/11. And the 9/11 people are saying, talk about 9/11, talk about 9/11. So I think, all right, I'm going to play it safer right now. We'll talk about oil for a minute. And he starts off by saying, well, there wouldn't be an oil problem if the government wouldn't just allow us to go in there and institute the draft and invade these countries. And I'm thinking, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And he said, and I said, well, he said something else that made me, he said something to the effect that the war in Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11 and Al-Qaeda. That Cheney never said that. And I said, are you kidding me, Jim? You're actually we're on syndicated radio talking to 20 million people right now, and you actually just stated that Cheney has never stated that 9/11 had anything to do with it. These people are insane. And you have to call them on it. So, thank you, and I appreciate you inviting me.
Okay, and we'll be in this same room talking about 9/11 right after this session. So, for Be the Media, a lot of you have cell phones, a lot of you can take movies. A lot of young people put movies up on YouTube that are getting dirty cops busted. So that's another way of being the media. Keep your phone and your movie camera ready. Okay, next speaker is Philip Rockstrauss.
I have a natural mistrust for the media because who can trust people that can talk into an appliance? I mean, it seems that we've evolved into a place where the people that you see on the media are some kind of mutants. I mean, in a way, they are us in corporatized America. We get up, as R.D. Lang said, we build this face so we can have a job, so we can participate in community, and we do what it is that benefits us. So you look at the type of people who are media friendly, who the camera likes, and who say the right things. These people are practicing careerism. See, that's why being a poet, I suspect that's why I was asked to be on the panel, is we look at things a little bit differently. Well, all day long we're going to hear ugly truths. We're going to have things that the mainstream media turns away because it's not entertaining enough. It doesn't go with the official narrative. Not too long ago I was in New York and I was doing a panel with David K. Johnson. And they said, well, why are you here as a poet? And instantly it came to me, I remembered a story that a friend of mine lived in New Orleans, pre-Katrina, but it was always chaotic enough there, even before the hurricane. There were human hurricanes going down the street, holding hurricanes. And in that place, he had an apartment where you had cheap rent, a little Victorian old place where he rented, and it had a terrible cockroach problem. And, I mean, the bugs would crawl out on the walls, the ceilings, and to make it even worse, there was a train that lumbered by outside. So when the train went, the entire scuttling, thunderous noise would come over the entire apartment. And he was a poet, an artist, didn't have a lot of money, he was a visual artist mainly. And so he hit upon this idea. Since he couldn't get rid of these ugly creatures, he just took Dayglow cans of spray paint. And every time he saw one, he zapped one with a different color. And then when people would come over at night and the train would thunder by, he'd flip off the lights. And this amazing light show would take place. And this is how I feel in time with all these ugly truths. Now, the best we can do is just light those motherfuckers up and turn them into art. And this goes into what you say of do things and put it on YouTube. I was very influenced. The biggest influence in my life was the punk rock era. Nobody sat around and waited for permission to start a band. There were bands out with 20-minute guitar solos. And people weren't having the participatory democracy that rock and roll, let's say, should be. And they learned 3 chords. They had a garage. They went and played in clubs that other people didn't want to play. They didn't wait around and wait for validation from the record industry and the mainstream culture. And they changed music. David can talk a little bit more about that. But you don't need the majority. You need, like with punk rock, a committed 2 to 5%. And these guys were amateurs, and they changed things. And I think it's the same way. We can see these lacquered dudes and dolls of the corporate media. And we're mortified by them. They don't, as I was saying earlier, resemble us. But do they? We get up And we always, as human beings, put a face to authority. We do things to advance our career. That's what they're doing. They're practicing a type of propaganda by omission, but we're living lives defined by the omission of freedom because we don't take the responsibility ourselves to go out and change things. So I would say take that mortification we feel, take that horror, and find a way, in your own way, to begin to express that, support people that are expressing it. Since we've been here at the conference, for example, I keep being asked by locals, what's this World Proust thing about? What are you guys doing up there? They think we're conspiring. They're thinking we're part of the New World Order. And when we speak to them, and I talk about the basic inequity in lives, how people are working harder. Just most people don't have information. They don't even listen to the media. They checked out because they're keeping a roof over their head. And they're just going from place to place, and they can't be reached. The best way I think we can reach ordinary people around here is to leave our comfort zones. Just remember that ordinary human conversation. I mean, the right wing does that. A friend of mine, Joe Bagent, wrote a book called Deer Hunting in America. He went to the Rubbermaid Corporation, and their right-wing plants in the Rubbermaid company, and they go down to the bars with them. People that are in management, and they sit in the bars and they say things like, Obama's a secret Muslim. That's where that stuff starts. And this is a very powerful meme. And we can go into these places, but we as comfortable liberals living in our comfort zones. I live in New York City, the worst part of it whatsoever. And we're all so successful that we don't show ordinary people that we're actually on their side, because we're doing a very conservative thing. We're protecting what we have, as they are in the media, as we are when we go to our jobs, and we practice the same thing. I think I'm going over the 10 minutes here, and I appreciate your time.